Today I had to pick one classic scientific paper to reflect on, and I chose Gibson E.J. and Walk R.D.'s The Visual Cliff, Scientific American. The 1960 study titled The Visual Cliff by Eleanor J. Gibson and Richard D. Walk, published in the Scientific American, is a cornerstone in developmental psychology and cognitive science. This study delves into the phenomenon of depth perception, particularly how young organisms, including human infants, perceive and respond to depth cues. Using an innovative apparatus, the visual cliff, the authors were able to examine how depth perception influences behavior, without the need for verbal cues or complex motor skills. By placing infants and animals in a controlled environment with a stimulated drop-off, the study provided crucial insights into the early development of perceptual abilities. The research is significant not only for its contribution to understanding sensory development, but is also for shaping later studies in both human and animal cognition. It remains influential in research on perceptual development, fear responses, and visual processing. Gibson and Walk aim to answer a fundamental question: do infants and animals have the ability to perceive depth? And if so, how does this ability influence their behavior? They developed the visual cliff as a method to stimulate the presence of a drop-off without any actual danger. The visual cliff consisted of a clear glass surface over a deep drop with a patterned floor on one side, the shallow side, and a visually empty drop on the other, the deep side. This setup allowed the researchers to observe how different species, including human infants, chicks, lambs, and others, responded when placed on the shallow side close to the perceived drop. The key question was whether the subjects would cross the apparent cliff to reach their caregivers or to avoid the drop. The responses provided critical data about their depth perception. For human infants, typically around 6 months, the research was striking. Infants displayed hesitation and reluctance to cross the visual cliff, implying that they could perceive depth and that they were wary of potential danger it suggested. Similarly, other species like chicks and lambs also showed hesitance when faced with the deep side, indicating that depth perception was not solely a human trait, but a more widespread ability. Gibson and Walk's methods involved placing each subject on the shallow side of the cliff, where they were encouraged to cross over to the deep side, typically by their caregiver or a familiar person. The researchers carefully observed their behavior, particularly noting whether they hesitated, crossed, or turned away from the deep side. The main findings suggested that depth perception was likely innate in young organisms. They possessed the ability to perceive depth very early in life, even before they learned to crawl or walk. The research conducted by Gibson and Walk is an exemplary study of developmental psychology, primarily due to its novel experimental design and significant findings. The use of the visual cliff as a non-threatening yet effective apparatus to assess depth perception was a breakthrough. The study's strength lies in its simplicity and effectiveness. It enabled researchers to observe infants and animals in a controlled environment, isolating the perceptual ability of depth without relying on verbal communication or subjective interpretation. One of the primary strengths of the study is the cross-species comparison. By testing not only human infants, but also other species like chicks and lambs, the researchers were able to generalize their findings beyond human development. The fact that these animals exhibited the same hesitation to cross the cliff suggests that depth perception is not a unique human trait, but a broader perceptual ability common across species. This finding had a profound impact on our understanding of perceptual development, suggesting that depth perception may be a part of an evolutionary toolkit necessary for survival. However, there are some limitations to the study. Although the findings suggest that depth perception emerges early in development, the study does not address the underlying mechanisms behind this ability. For example, the research does not explore how the brain processes visual cues to form the perception of our depth. While the study successfully demonstrates that infants and animals perceive depth, it leaves questions regarding the neurobiological processes involved unanswered. Moreover, the study primarily investigates visual cues, but depth perception involves more than just sight. In real-world scenarios, depth perception relies on multiple sensory inputs, such as tactile and auditory cues. While Gibson and Walk's work focuses on visual cues, it could have been extended to study how other senses, in combination with sight, contribute to depth perception. Additionally, the study was conducted in an experimental setting, and is unclear how the reactions observed in the lab might translate to more natural environments. For instance, how do infants and animals process depth in everyday, less controlled situations? How does experience influence the perception of depth? These are more important considerations for future research. Another key aspect to consider is the emotional and psychological factors that may have influenced the subject's behavior. For instance, infants might have hesitated to cross the visual cliff due to an inherent fear of heights or of the unknown. While the study suggests that the hesitation is due to depth perception, fear might have played a role in their decision-making process. In fact, fear responses and their development are an area that could be further explored in relation to depth perception. The study's implications extend far beyond the realm of perceptual psychology. The findings provide evidence for the existence of innate visual abilities that emerge early in life, influencing how we understand cognitive and sensory development. Furthermore, Gibson and Walk's work laid the groundwork for later studies on cognitive development, fear responses, and even evolutionary psychology. It raised important questions about how early perceptual abilities evolve and how organisms respond to environmental cues, issues that are relevant in both scientific research and the practical application, such as education, child development, and even robotics. Reflecting personally, this study opens up many areas of curiosity. One aspect that stands out is how depth perception is influenced by an individual's developmental stage. For instance, does depth perception evolve as infants gain motor skills, such as crawling or walking, or is there already a fully formed ability at birth? Additionally, how does the combination of visual and other sensory cues shape the way children develop an understanding of the physical world around them? Exploring these questions would provide a deeper understanding of not only perceptual development, but also how cognition and perception are intertwined throughout life. Gibson and Walk's visual cliff study remains one of the most influential pieces of research in cognitive science and developmental psychology. The studies show that depth perception develops early in life and is an innate ability shared by humans and other species. While the research design was highly innovative, it left several unanswered questions regarding how the neural mechanisms involved and the role of experience in developing depth perception, and how other sensory modalities might influence this ability. However, this work significantly advanced our understanding of perceptual development, influencing later research in developmental psychology, neuroscience, and cognitive sciences. Today, the visual cliff experiment is still used as a tool to explore cognitive and developmental questions, cementing its relevance and impact in modern research. In conclusion, I learned that depth was innate from birth, but it also leaves me with the question of, who would give up their child for this research? It is helping towards research and further help us into understanding depth, but it would also be scary for the infant. The two main resources I used while researching for this video was a was a presentation by OCR called Child Psychology, a Research Guide, and an article by the National Institute of Health called Pitfall or Pratfall: Behavioral Differences in Infant Learning.